What's up, guys? Welcome to Dev Drawer and welcome to a new episode where we're going to be talking about how to connect to a MySQL database using PHP. By the end of this tutorial, we should have a simple CRUD system working. So CRUD means create, read, update, and delete. So like I said, we'll have a simple CRUD system working, not very fancy looking. We'll get into that in a future tutorial, but for now we're just going to kind of show you the functionality of it. So first thing you want to notice is that we are using Wamp. Wamp is a pretty cool way that you can create your own virtual server on a Windows machine. Typically we wouldn't use this in-house because we have our own Linux server with us, but for now I figured this would be the easiest way for a lot of people to get started. So I went ahead and took the liberties of creating a db.local web server on Wamp, and I've also opened up PHP MyAdmin. So this is where our database is going to live. This is where our files are going to live. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file called index.php just to kind of show you that the web server is reacting to our code. So blank file, blank page. Over here we're using Visual Studio Code because it gives you a lot of really cool functionalities, like for example Emmet is built into it, so we could type in HTML:5 and it'll give us a HTML5 boilerplate. So let's go ahead and play around with this a little bit. We're going to call this website DevDrawer DB, and then I'm also going to add a h1 tag. So welcome to DevDrawer, and we're going to save this, refresh, and now we have DevDrawer DB and welcome to DevDrawer. So one of the things that we want to do is create the files for the CRUD system. So CRUD, you have your read right now, which is index.php, and we're going to create another file called create.php, which would be the C of CRUD, a new file which is insert.php, which would be the, well, create and insert, the same thing. I actually meant to have this one be update. So it would be the U of the CRUD system, and then finally a delete.php, which will be the delete file of the PHP system. So let's go ahead and get rid of these because we don't need them right now. This isn't the way you would normally set it up in a production environment. This is a very simplistic model of it just to kind of show you the functionality. But for right now we're going to create it like this. But in production you would use routes and views and controllers and all this other kind of stuff that we can get into in another tutorial. In my simple file systems, I like to create an includes folder where this would house the database connection, so db.php, as well as our function file, so functions.php. On our index page, we're just going to do a simple call to our functions file, so that way that we can start using functions that are included. So let's do include, and then I'm going to link to the includes folder /functions.php, and this will link out to this folder. In this folder, or I'm sorry, in this file, we're going to do a require once, and we're going to include our db.php. Since these are, they're in the same folder, we don't have to redeclare the includes folder. It's already there, so we're just linking to a file within the folder that it's already in. So we can just do db.php. So what we need to do right now is create a database. So we're going to log in using the root, and password is password because it is a it's a Wamp installation, so we haven't changed any of the default configuration. So root, blank password, we're logging into a MySQL database. We're going to create a new database, and let's call it DevDrawer, and we're going to create that database. So in this db.php, we want to connect to this database, and in order to connect to this database, we're going to use MySQLi, and I'm just going to call our connection MySQLi for simplistic purposes. You can call it con, you can call it db, you can call it whatever you want to, as long as it's something easily recognizable to you as a database connection. So we're going to do new MySQLi, and then we're going to put in the variables that we just set up. So localhost, the root user, it has a blank password. We're going to be connecting to the dev drawer database, and for Wamp usage we're going to be declaring the port as 3308. So once we have that done, we want to make sure that we can connect to the database. So if we do if MySQLi connection error or connect error, we're going to exit out the code and print a message saying error connecting to database. So right now we can test this out and there should be no errors on the site. However, if we come over here and let's say we got our password wrong, 123, now it'll show that error saying access denied, and it'll actually display the error message, error connecting to the database. You can turn off these warnings so that you don't see them, but for development purposes, it's pretty good to keep them in there to make sure that you got your variables declared and all this other kind of good stuff. So right now, let's go ahead and revert this back so that we're able to connect to our database. And I want to create a simple table. We're going to call it employees, and we're going to have an ID, first name, last name, and a phone number record. So that's going to be 4 columns, and we got our ID. We also want to make this the primary key and to have it auto increment. So we want to set it as auto increment and set it as the primary key. This way that when we add a new record to the database, that ID will automatically increment up so that you can keep track of your IDs and do your edits and deletes and updates based on those IDs. Then we're also going to create a F name, L name, and a phone. And we're going to set these as varchar 255 all the way down. The phone number can be whatever you want it to be, but we're going to allow dashes inside of our phone numbers, so we'll just go ahead and set it up as a varchar in order for it to take strings as well as integers. The ID type is going to be an integer because it is an auto incrementing ID. Alright, so let's go ahead and save this. Now we know the database that we want to hit, the table that we want to pull from, and we want to display it on this index.php. So inside of our functions file, we're going to create a function. Actually, first I want to show y'all a function that I use. So this is something that allows me to format arrays so that they're not just one very long string. It actually formats them so they're readable data. So I always call this function format code, and then we pass the array that we're going to format. You surround that with a echo of a pre-tag, and then you print out the array like you normally would, and then you close that pre-tag echo. Basically, this will wrap our array in a code, HTML code format, so that it actually displays it line by line rather than just one wall of text. You don't necessarily have to use this function. I just use it because it makes things a lot easier for me to digest whenever I'm trying to pull an array. Alright, so let's get started into our select statement. So we're going to call this select statement, and we're going to set a function with no variables. We're going to call it select all with no variables on it. So also one thing we need to do is global the MySQLi, which is the connection name that we called it here. This way we just don't have to declare it every single time we pull one of these functions on the front end. We don't have to pass it. We can just set it as a global variable that's called. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a statement equals MySQLi, and then we're going to use a prepared statement. So prepare, and then we're going to select star from employees. In production, never ever use star because that selects everything from the entire database or the entire table that you're selecting from. So what you would normally do is instead of doing star, you would select F name L name, etc. But for this purpose, we're just going to select everything. The more you select, the slower your queries are going to be. So make sure that you optimize your queries to actually pull only what you want it to pull at that given time. Alright, so the next part, we're going to execute our statement. So statement execute, and then we're going to be displaying a result equals statement get result. And this is just going to get us a result. However, we want to check to see if that result actually has any rows being pulled. So if the result num rows is equal to 0, we're going to echo out no rows. If it's not, then it'll continue processing our function. So if there is rows, we're going to do a while loop, and while row equals result fetch a sock, and this will just grab us an associative array of the data that's contained in this table. Alright, so we're going to create, or we're going to append to a data array, and typically you would have like row f name here that would be tied into a f name variable on your array, but I'm just going to create the array and display the entire row that's being pulled. Again, typically you wouldn't want to do this in production, but for this purpose, I think just to kind of show you what it does, I think this is the way that we need to do this. And then we need to close out our statement. So this statement close corresponds with your statement execute. That way that every time you're done using an SQL connection, you close it out so that there's no bleed over into other functions. One other thing that I need to do here is to declare this data as an array and just make it blank so that way it's not bleeding over from any other functions or any other displays on the web page itself. And then finally, after we close, we are going to return data. So now we have our select all function and we have our format code of function. So inside of this, we are going to do a PHP format code, and then we're going to wrap our variable in it because we know that it's being returned as an array. If we go to look at our page now, we should see no rows, which is exactly what we want it to because the database does not have any information in it. So let's go and add some information. Here, insert. So let's insert John Doe with a phone number of 123 456 7890. And then let's do another one for Jane Doe, and she's going to be 123 456 7899. Alright, so, and we're not going to add an ID here because again that is an auto incrementing ID. So we're going to go ahead and insert these two rows. Now if we go back to our page and refresh, we have two of our people being pulled out of the database based on our selection. So what we want to do is display all of them as a list, which right now it's just being displayed as an array. We'll go over how to put them into like a table or a list format so they can be formatted and made to look pretty, as well as have pretty links that can link you to your update and delete and insert and all this kind of stuff. But for now, it's just going to be just displaying an array. So this is our select all statement. It's pulling everything. But we also want to have a function to be able to pull a single person. And we're going to create that by doing select single statement. And then we're going to say this is the function select single, and we're going to return an ID. If that ID does not exist, we're going to force it to be null, so that way our executed statement will not actually run. Again, we're going to, actually I can probably just copy all of this just because it's pretty much the same thing. The only thing that we're doing is changing up the select star from employees, where ID equals question mark. And that question mark is going to allow us to bind a parameter to this statement. And that's just to kind of help prevent SQL injection and kind of help prevent people from being able to modify your database by using bad code. So we're going to bind a parameter to this. So bind parameter. And then we're going to say that it's going to be an integer, and it's going to actually be the ID that we're pulling from the function itself. We don't need to have a data array in this because we're not going to be displaying an array. We're actually going to be returning the single row, which again is probably not the best way to do it in production, but for this case we are going to just return the single array or single row as an array. Alright, so we can get rid of our while statement because we're only gathering one. So let's go ahead and take away while result equals so sorry I lost my train of thought. So row equals result fetch a sock outside of the while loop, so it's only grabbing that single one from the database. And then we are going to declare our let's see, we have row, so it's already being set there, so instead of returning data we are going to return row. Alright, so now if we go back to our index.php, we can take this function and wrap it into our format code, and let's get rid of this for now. And because we know the IDs of what's being produced in our database, we can hit browse and say that this is ID1, ID2. So if we pass the variable 1, that will pass. Spelling is really bad today. That will pass John Doe. If we pass the ID of 2, that will pass Jane Doe. So that's essentially how we can select all records, select a single record, and we can even set it up where in here, instead of doing format code, we can set a variable to equal select single 1. And let's change this to a 1 so we can reference. So with this, we actually are creating a variable user that is an array. So we can do something like echo welcome space user, since that's our variable, and we know we have an fname variable inside of that array. And then let's do lname as well. User lname. And then we close this off. So if we refresh the page again, now it says welcome John Doe. If we change this, it should say welcome Jane Doe. If we change it to a 3, no rows are going to be existing. So no rows. And you would account for that. You would have if a set user, then display this. If not, display nothing. You know, you can handle that a various amount of ways. But for right now, we're just going to leave it as no rows, so that we know that it's not hitting something if it's not hitting something. Alright, so let's go back to our functions. We need to start creating some insert records, update records, delete records, all this kind of cool stuff. So let's go over here and create an insert statement, and then we'll create the code that manages that insert statement. So we're going to go ahead and just say insert statement and close our comment, and then we're just going to create a function called insert and just leave it at that right now. So the next thing we need to do is on our create.php, we are going to so we already got it open, so let's just copy what we've done in the index.php. We don't need this because we're not displaying it, and we'll just change this to insert so that we can recognize what page we're on. So let's go ahead and create the form. So form action equals nothing because we're going to make it redirect to itself, but you can have it redirect to a route, a function, a specific page, however you want it to handle that. But for right now, we're just going to make it basically post to itself. So we're going to set the method as post, close out our form, and then we're going to create a label for first name was the first one. And you don't have to use for. However, if you want to be ADA compliant, for people with screen readers, for kind of helps them point to where these labels are referencing. So we're going to do for first name, and then we're actually going to create the input type equals text, and then its name is going to be fname, its ID is also going to be fname. For right now, we're not really using the ID portion of it. We're using the name because that's what PHP uses, but if we ever wanted to do something with jQuery or Ajax, the ID, that's where that would come into play at. We're going to set the value to nothing because there is nothing here, since this is the create page. And I'm just going to copy this for the last name and the phone number. So let's change our variables name here. So we got L name, change this to last name, change this to phone, same here, phone. Alright, and then last thing we're going to do is add a button named btn insert. You can call it whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to have it for this so that we know what we need to call the top of our page. Alright, so now we want to do, let's go ahead and see what it looks like, and then I'll show you what we want to do with it. So let's go to create.php. So we have our form and our insert record. Right now it doesn't do anything, so we just want to kind of go in there and at the top of this include a function, or include our insert function. But first thing we need to do is check to see if the insert button has been clicked. And the way to do that is to check for is set post, since it is a post form, btn insert. And if it checks to see that that post has been done, it'll check to see if the btn insert has been pushed. If it has, then we're going to run our insert function. And let me go ahead and do my end if. Now, what we don't know is that this hold on, let's see, if is set unexpected if. Oh, it's because I forgot my semicolon. Alright, so what we don't know is what we're going to insert yet, because we haven't done anything with that function. So I'm going to come back into here, and we're going to be passing those variables that we just created. So fname, we're going to make it equal null if it doesn't have anything produced. Then same thing here, lname equals null, and then lastly phone equals null. And this will basically just let us grab those variables from the post. So let's go ahead and do our global MySQLi connection again, and then we're going to create our statement. It's going to be statement MySQLi, and we're going to use a prepared statement again. So prepare, and this time we're going to do, instead of doing select from, we're going to do insert into employees. And we're going to set the variables that we're inserting. So fname, lname, phone, and the values of that insert is going to be question mark, comma, question mark, comma, question mark, because we're using a prepared statement. Now this prepared statement is also going to have the parameters binded to it. So we're going to do bind param. And it's basically the same thing that you see up here where we're binding the integer, but we're not binding an integer this time. We're actually binding 3 strings. So it's going to be SSS, and then we're going to declare those strings from the what we're pushing over to the function itself. So fname, lname, phone, and that is all that we need for these three. And then we're going to execute our statement. And then finally, we're going to close our statement. So for a function like this, you would typically, as soon as you get done inserting it, you would redirect it or whatever it is. But for right now, we're going to skip that. We'll do that whenever we get something like an update.php page done, and then I'll show you how to pass some variables over to it. For right now, we're just going to be inserting this statement. So if we go back to our page over here, we're going to say that now we want to have test person with 0. Alright, and then we go to hit insert record. It's going to redirect back to the same page, so you don't know that anything happened. But if we go over to our database and we hit browse, wait, oh, we're not passing the variables yet, so it doesn't know what it needs to run, so it's not running anything right now. So let's go back to our create, and we've already our create. So we've already added the function here, so we just need to pass these post variables to it. So post fname, and then we're going to post lname, and then phone number. So let's do that real quick. Alright, so now that these variables are being passed along to our insert statement, we should be able to run this again. So let's do test person with a dummy phone number and insert record. Now if we come over here to browse, you see that test person has been added with the dummy phone number. So right now we have this, it just redirects back to itself. What I want it to do is whenever you insert a record, I want it to go to the update.php page, which the update.php page is pretty much going to look just like this. It's just going to use a different function. So let's go over to the update. We're going to paste this in, and then we're going to change this up. So we're not going to be using btn insert to do our update, and we're not going to be using the insert function to do our update. We're actually going to be doing the update function to do our update. However, for this information down here, we're going to have to grab a variable based on an ID. So let's say we'll do that in just a second. Let me kind of clean it up a little bit so we know that this is the correct page. Alright, so now we're on the update page. We have our isSet done. Everything is still named the way that it should be. So what we need to do here is declare a variable just like we did on the home page. So we can do user isSet get ID. Now the difference between get and post is post comes with the form, get comes with the URL, which I'll show you in just a minute, but it's basically a question mark ID equals 1. Whereas post, everything is hidden. So you always want to make your forms do post updates, and then you want to do gets for stuff like this. But right now we're just getting a it's an ID that's straight out of the database, which is something you wouldn't normally want to do. What you'd want to do is encrypt that ID whenever you're sending them over to that page, and then decrypt it on this page. But for now, for simplistic purposes, we are just going to continue on with the basically the plain text ID. Alright, so if set get ID, we're going to, so if it is set, we're going to select single, which is the function that we created and displayed on the index.php page. But this time, instead of passing an ID, we're going to get a dynamic ID, or we're going to return false. Now, if we return false, we want it to do something. If we return false, we want it to show a message down here that says to not update, or not show the update form. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to do if, or PHP if user is not equal to false, display the form. Otherwise, let's do our PHP else, let's go ahead and add our end if. So if it doesn't display the form, we just want to do h1 user is not set, try again. And we can actually test this out. So if the user is not being set, which means that it's not able to grab anything, it's returning a false, or the ID itself is just not pulling anything over, we're going to have user is not set, try again. So if we come over here to update.php, it says user is not set. However, if we do update.php ID of 1, it shows our form. But now what we needed to do is to show that data that's contained inside of that form. And the way that you do that is inside of the values, since you're returning a value and you know that there's a value present in order to be at this position, we're going to do PHP echo user fname. And that's just basically going to return that value in that array that we've assigned. And again, we're grabbing everything from the database. Not the best way to do it, but then, you get the idea. Alright, so now if we go back over here, refresh, we got John Doe. We change this to 2, we got Jane Doe. If we change it to 3, we got test person, the one that we just inserted into it. Alright, so now we have this page. So let's go back to our insert.php. It's not insert, it's create. Create.php. Okay, so in our create.php, the function is that you want to insert it, and then you want to, it does nothing currently, but we want it to go in there and redirect them to the update page. So we're going to add a header redirect, and we're going to set the location to use the MySQL insert ID. So we know we're going to update.php, and the ID is the variable that we need to pass. So ID equals, and then we're going to do MySQLi insert ID. So now when we add a new person to our employees database, it's going to redirect them to update.php ID, grab the ID that it inserted. So let's go ahead and test that out. So let's come in here and say someone else 555 55 5555. Insert that record, and now we're on the update page for someone else because it passed over that ID of 4. Okay, so now what do we want the update functionality to do? So we have our update function here. We know we're going to get fname, lname, and phone. So we can essentially take this, copy it, change this to update, and then change this to update. So there's going to be some key differences, not a lot of differences, but some key ones. So first thing we're going to do is, instead of doing insert into, we're going to do update employees, and then instead of doing it this way, we're going to do set fname equals question mark, lname equals question mark, and then finally phone equals question mark. And then we can get rid of this for now, but we're also going to have to pass on the ID. So where ID equals question mark. If you don't pass on the ID, then whenever you go to run this, it's going to update all employees. So it's very important to make sure you have that ID, and we're going to set it up here so it passes that ID to our function, and it is required, so it cannot ever be null. Alright, so we're going to bind our parameters again. So we're going to do string, 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 integer, and then we're going to our fname, lname, phone, and then ID. Then we're going to execute it, and then we're going to run. Let's go ahead and get rid of this so we don't end up making it go back to itself. And we're going to do if statement affected rows is false or equal to none. Then we want to echo out no rows updated. And the reason that we're going to do this is because we want to, got an error, unexpected ID. Yep, okay. So, $, okay. So what we're going to do, okay. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to update the employees, we're going to bind those parameters, we're going to execute that statement, and then we're going to check to see if there's any affected rows. If there is no affected rows, we're going to update no rows updated, because if you're over on the update side and you don't type anything and you hit submit, it doesn't actually do anything. So we're just going to show them that nothing's being updated. So and we can test that now. So if we go to update record, oh, I got to pass the ID. So let's go back here. And then in our update, we're going to create a hidden field that's called ID. So let's come over here and do input type equals hidden, name equals ID, value equals this. Now we're going to do PHP echo user ID, because we want to get what's being pulled from the database, and then we're going to close that out. Alright, so now let's come over here and we refresh the screen. So let's change this to, right now let's test out what we were trying to test previously, where we hit update, it should say no records updated. Losing my mind today. Post ID needs to be passed because we are gathering that. Let's try that again. So let's confirm to reconfirm the submission. Okay. Let me see. We got our execute statement, line 53. We're binding the parameters. So we're passing the ID, binding the parameters, and then we're executing it. Okay, let me go back one, and let's check to make sure that it's okay. It's grabbing the ID, and on our update page, we are doing the post ID. Call to a member function on bool. Line 53. So let's see, what are we doing wrong? F name, L name, phone ID. F name, L name, phone, where ID equals question mark. Well, if y'all can find that before I do, definitely comment in the comments below, because I am not seeing what is wrong with that statement. Call the member function bind parameter. Update employees, set F name. Oh, missing a comma. Did y'all catch it before I did? Alright, well, let's see if that finally works. So let's try that again. Ta-da. Okay. Commas, semicolons. Okay. Anywho, so let's go back to getting into what we were getting into. So no rows have been updated because it didn't actually change anything. But if we come over here and do someone else to, or someone to else, it'll update. So we can go back to ID 4 and it's there. We can change any of these records and it'll keep that update for us. Else to someone else. Alright, so now we have the read, the update, and the insert. So create, read, update. The next function that we need to do is delete. So let me go ahead and copy this, because once you kind of get your base pattern for your code done, it's pretty much the same thing, more often than none. Alright, so let's create a function called delete.php, or delete when we're going to pass an ID variable. And the ID again is required in order to proceed. Okay, so we're going to use another prepared statement, and we're going to, instead of doing this, we're going to delete from employees where ID equals question mark. And there is no set. So delete from employees where ID equals question mark, and we're going to pass this one parameter of ID so we can get rid of that, and then we're going to execute it, and then we are going to close this, and then once we get done doing this, we're just going to redirect it back to the home page. So we're going to do header location slash. So now once this is deleted, it will just redirect them back to the home page. So on our delete page, since this is the last one that we have left, we are going to, we don't need to display any information here because it's basically just a pass-through page. So we're going to include our functions.php, and then we're going to user, I'm just going to declare the variable. It's not even being used for anything, but just to prevent any kind of future issues, or if we actually want to be able to pass it anywhere. So we're going to do get ID, and if the ID is not set, or if it is set, we are going to run the delete function, or we're just going to exit and not do anything. We could also have it where it redirects back to the home page regardless of whether it's set or not. Just for this purpose, we're just going to not do anything. And then we're going to run that get ID against that function. So let's go ahead, and we got someone else here, and we got someone else here in the database. So we're going to change this to delete.php and delete ID of 4. Browse. It removed it. However, it did not redirect to our location. So we're binding it. Header location. Oh, semicolon. Man, I am bad at typing today. Okay, so now this one's not going to be any good. So let's go back to the home page so we can see what variables we can pull. So let's go ahead and delete the test person. So delete.php ID of 3, since the ID is declared here. Hit that, redirects us back to the home page, and now you can see that it's done. So we have our read, our create. So let's go ahead and create someone else. So test person. Now we also have our update. So we're going to do tester person, and we go back to the home page, and we have tester person with an ID of 5. And finally we have our delete.php ID equals 5. So there we go. That is essentially how you create a very simplistic create, read, update, and delete, or CRUD system using PHP and MySQL. So in closing, we are going to hopefully try to push out something once a week. And whenever we push out our next tutorial, we're going to try to expand on this project a little bit more. We're going to make it where it is a little prettier. We're probably going to integrate Bootstrap, maybe start doing some jQuery. Instead of having to go to these pages individually, we can call them from a jQuery function or an Ajax function. But in the meantime, like and subscribe definitely to this channel if you want to see more tutorials like this. We hope to do them once a week. So if there's anything that y'all want me to do, definitely leave a comment below, and I'll be checking in on it. So thanks for now. Have a good one.